Hey guys, this is Jay Calderon with Jay Unboxing, giving you my immediate reaction to the Manny Pacquiao Yordenis Ugas fight, as well as the co-featured bout between Robert Guerrero and Victor Ortiz. And to get started, I'll give a quick rundown of the card's results in total, which of course took place at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada, airing live on pay-per-view. In his PBC debut, featherweight Carlos Castro defeated Oscar Escandon via 10-round TKO. It was a bit of a disastrous fight for him, actually. He was kind of perhaps on his way to a loss in his debut for Premier Boxing Champions and managed to pull it out in that final round. Then we had Mark Magasayo defeat Julio Ceja via 10-round KO in the knockout of the night, also in a featherweight contest. Knocked him out in the 10th round. Picture-perfect shot, completely unconscious. Great fight, and a very good finish to it, of course. In the co-featured bout, we had Robert Guerrero defeat Victor Ortiz in a pretty close 10-round unanimous decision. It was at a welterweight limit, with both giving and taking pretty well, and we'll get more into that, but ultimately Guerrero did pick up the victory. And in the main event, of course, the upset of the night, we had Yordenis Ugas defeating Manny Pacquiao to retain his portion of the welterweight crown via 12-round unanimous decision. Now, in terms of the breakdown here, we'll start with the co-featured bout. It was a very good fight between guys, just a step or two slower. Like I said for the prediction video that I made for this fight, it could go either way, and yes, they are faded fighters, so it's not as though it's a fight you can easily predict, or that is going to have huge ramifications on the sport necessarily. But if they're both faded and they're both looking to make one final run, it's still a compelling fight in its own right, and it definitely had the ability to be that, and it really was an action-packed fight for all 10 rounds. In the fight, it was very ebby and flowy. Neither man dictated large stretches of time, but while Ortiz would win around here or there through sheer force and landing perhaps the more powerful shots, as he was a naturally bigger welterweight, he couldn't keep it going. Meanwhile, Guerrero likely didn't hurt his man, but was consistently busier, throwing more punches. I believe he threw something in the neighborhood of 100 punches more in the entire fight, approximately. Ultimately, the busy work of Guerrero likely won him this fight, and while Ortiz may have landed harder shots, that couldn't quite seem to be enough for him. He just couldn't capitalize on it enough times. So with that fight, of course, you're left with kind of the question of what's left for either, or what's next for either fighter here. On the one hand, you look at Guerrero, he's the winner, he's naturally in a better position because of the fact that he won the fight, but Ortiz still has a little bit of cachet as well. It just kind of depends on how you see them faring against some of the younger guns at welterweight. Even guys like a Sean Porter or a Keith Thurman who, are not the youngest of bucks in anyone's stretch of the imagination, but they're certainly far more likely to be in their primes. That being said, could I see someone like a Sean Porter facing a Robert Guerrero in the immediate future, perhaps to prepare him for maybe a bigger fight if the Terence Crawford fight isn't made immediately next? Possibly. It's not necessarily a fight that's going to do him all that much good in terms of preparing rather for someone like a Bud Crawford, but it's a fight he gets paid for that he probably wins, and it's another name on the ledger. At the same time, it's difficult to see either of these men, Guerrero or Ortiz, doing all that well in these kinds of fights where they're really going to have to take a shot. They're going to have to gamble a little bit because they're certainly not going to be the favorite in any fight with anyone really in the top 5, certainly not the top 5, and definitely not the top 10 either. So it's one of those things where it'll be interesting to see where they go, and they both put in a good enough effort that they don't have to go away necessarily, but it still wasn't enough for me to look at it and think that I was wrong and that somehow they're going to be able to make some noise at 147 pounds. It's just too deep a division, and they were never defensive wizards, to be all that honest about it. I just don't see it happening for them, but still, compelling fight going into it, and they've actually backed it up. It was a pretty interesting fight, to say the very least. Moving into the main event, the bout started with Ugas computing at first, and Pacquiao started actually pretty well in the first couple of rounds. However, the Cuban was doing better in those kind of third or fourth or fifth rounds, and he was willing to engage at times as well, which kind of became troubling for Pacquiao, where if you just had Ugas sitting back and looking to counter and jab all night, and Pacquiao was just being the guy pushing forward and more active, he could have possibly stolen this fight. The problem was that Ugas actually did enough to win those rounds and did more and more of that as the fight progressed. Ugas was having real success, and it was just a jab and a right hand that he would kind of loop around the guard, and Pacquiao was turning away from it kind of into his own guard to make sure he shielded himself from any real damage, but it was still a scoring shot, and he was landing it consistently. While Pacquiao had runs late in those kind of final rounds, I think around the 9th and 10th perhaps, it just wasn't enough. Ugas was always a step ahead, making his man miss, scoring consistently, and ultimately winning a legitimate unanimous decision. Ugas won via scores of 115-113 and 116-112 two times on the official judges' scorecards. Didn't score the fight completely. I kind of was just on and off. I wasn't like putting together some sort of, special card or anything like that in my head, but I kind of was keeping track of it, and about, to be honest, 116-112 seems about right to me. The announce team was all over the place in terms of who they thought should win or what the narrative of the fight was, but I mean, ultimately the fights tell their own stories. Ugas was just better on the night, was always going to be tricky. I remember even when I was giving my prediction for the Pacquiao fight, well, I thought he could eke out a win, which I actually thought he could have done. It just obviously wasn't meant to be on the night. The odds for this fight were way too wide in favor of Pacquiao. And to me, I think that kind of showed up in this fight where Ugas probably surprised a few people with how good and how well schooled and trained he was for this fight. I mean, he came in expecting to win, knowing that he could win, and of course, he ends up winning the fight. The question now is, how good is Ugas at this point? I mean, can he unify the division? You look at the division, yes, it's deep, but I mean, he's now beaten Pacquiao, possibly retired him. In many people's eyes, he might have beaten Sean Porter. He's a tricky enough fighter that he could trouble anyone else within the top kind of 5, whether it's a Keith Thurman or even an Errol Spence now potentially going into the future. Is it impossible to imagine that this man actually unifies the division? I don't necessarily think so. The only thing he really has kind of working against him is that he's not a spring chicken in his own right. He's 35 years old, so he will have to kind of put his foot on the gas here a little bit and kind of make sure he gets to this sooner rather than later. That being said, Cubans do tend to have a little more in the reserve later on in their career, and he did not look 35 years old in the ring against Pacquiao, though maybe easier to look younger when you're in there with a guy who's looking all of 42 in his performance, to be perfectly fair. Now, did Pacquiao look terrible? No. But you do have to kind of ask this question of, is Pacquiao old in the first place, or did Ugas make him look old? And I think it was a little more of the latter there. I think Pacquiao could still fare pretty well against a lot of fighters at 147. Maybe not the upper echelon, but enough of them. It's just Ugas is a much better fighter than people want to give him credit for. And I think that's what we kind of saw there in that fight. Again, hard to say whether or not he can unify, and it's hard to say exactly what made Pacquiao look his age in this fight, if it's just pure age or Ugas having a really good game plan in place, switching up his defensive stances, keeping his lead foot on the outside, not letting Pacquiao really step in with those crazy big exchanges. And every so often he would kind of pay for it, and it sort of reminded Ugas to be more disciplined. It was just a really, really good effort put in by him and his team, and obviously, a tremendous night for him. Of course, the questions I have for you guys are pretty simple here. How successful can Ugas be at trying to unify? How do you think Manny can do and fare going forward if he chooses to, or should he retire? And finally, of course, how badly must Spence and his really bad run of luck here, how badly must he be kicking himself knowing he might have had a prone Pacquiao, ready to be taken out by a big, solid welterweight who has some skill? Very intriguing storylines all there. Would love to hear your thoughts on that, of course. And as always, please be sure to like, follow, share, subscribe, and comment below. Follow me on Twitter at jcaldor_JOB. You can email me at junboxing@gmail.com. And of course, visit junboxing.com for schedule results, betting odds, rankings, all that good stuff. And as always, until next time.